Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risks, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. And I bet you're exposed to investment risk right now. To reduce it, go to myworstinvestmentever.com and download the risk reduction checklist I've made specifically for you, my podcast listeners, based on the lessons I've learned from all of my guests. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotts from A Stotts Academy, and I'm here with Roshan Cariappa.
You got that right.
Roshan, please take a minute and fill in any further tidbits about your life.
Yeah, that sounds about right, Andrew. Excited to be here. And yeah, you got the pronunciation right.
Perfect. Well, let me introduce you to the audience. Roshan has over 12 years experience as an entrepreneur and operator at early and growth stage startups, specializing in going from 0 to 1 and setting up cross-functional teams. Currently, he heads marketing at Vymo, one of the fastest growing SaaS startups in India, and also runs Bharat Varta podcast, which is about politics, policy, and culture focused on India. And if it's not enough to already do one podcast, he does another one called the Startup Operator Podcast. It's wisdom from Indian founders, operators, and investors. You can connect with him on Twitter at Roshan Cariappa, and you'll have all that in the show notes that you can go to. But Roshan, take a moment and tell us a little bit about your fascinating life.
Thank you so much, Andrew. You make me seem, like a porcelain vase without any cracks. But I'm happy to talk about the cracks as we go through the podcast. And I think that is what is super interesting about what you're trying to do. Because I'm reminded of this Steve Jobs quote, something to the effect of, everything around you was built by people no smarter than yourself, right? And
Great
I
quote.
think, yeah, and I think what you do in these podcasts is to unravel the human element of everyone around you and get people to talk about their failures, which I think is an admirable thing. So fantastic.
Thank you. And that's, it's what makes this podcast so fun because this podcast is real. And how
Yep.
many podcasts, are you on where, you listen to or you're on that you basically feel like the person's kind of putting on a brave face of who they are and amazing things that they do. And here it's like, it's already taken as a given that you've done all those things and you've got all those things. I mean, but
Yeah.
then to come on here and speak in real terms. So I think with that as a lead-in, now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one ever goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstances leading up to it, and then tell us your story.
Sure. So, up until the point where I made this mistake, I had done plenty of dumb things in my life, right? You could think about silly things like investing in, let's say, MLM schemes or buying that stupid heating belt that burns your belly fat and things to that effect, right? And some things which, a lot more impactful, a lot more larger mistakes as well. But none of them compared to the cost that this particular incident had on my sanity, right? So the story starts in 2012. I started a business. Up until then, I had worked for about 4 years in an early stage startup and was fairly cross-functional. Didn't find an interesting job. I mean, the growth function as it stands today had not been invented, and I didn't really want to sort of pigeonhole myself into sales, product, or marketing. I wanted to overlap meaningfully on all functions. So I kind of invented one, So we started off offering marketing services to startups and small businesses, and then pivoted to building digital assets. What we realized was digital was becoming front and center, and people didn't really have a focal point for all of their marketing activities. So we set out to build these apps and so on, right? And this was 2012, 2013, and about a couple of years in, we're making reasonable money, no complaints. It's not going gangbusters or something, but it's a living, we're being able to pay for ourselves and then some, and then we had this itch to pivot again. And you know what's coming up, right? So this time we decide that we're done with services and we decide to build products, right? Which is it's not a bad choice by itself. If you look at it, products are a lot more scalable. Unlike services where more money means more people, products are a lot more scalable. And really, the services business, it requires an enormous amount of patience, and there is a certain temperament that you have to sort of develop. And no no disrespect to whoever is in services, but it really sucks the passion out of building things, because you really have to be hands off, and you might have to build the 40th e-commerce site or the 25th social app after this, right? And beyond a point, it just gets jaded, and you don't really want to do that. And this was also during 2014, 2015, when there was this huge consumer internet boom in India. So literally every app business was getting funded. You could just take an example like, yournameapp.com, and it would get funded, right? So there was a lot of optimism in the air, and a lot of new users on the internet and so on. So we decided to go all in, and to be fair, before that we did try to hive teams off, but it didn't really work out, right? So we said, let's do this cold turkey. And I remember meeting my clients around that time and talking about this, and they thought I was just seriously nuts, because here is this kid who's actually, persuaded me to part with my money, and then he's coming back and saying, no, I don't want it anymore, I mean, I can't imagine what they thought, right? I mean, so they probably thought I got a concussion over the weekend or something of that sort. Yeah. But I went about it stridently. It hurt. It really hurts to say no to cash. I mean, you would agree, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to build. And, what did we want to build? We had to pick a market, and that's about the only deliberate choice that we made, right? Picking a market. And we thought, tech for families specifically, because people had started building apps for dating and apps for professionals and so on and so forth. But we thought that, families were kind of getting more remote and distributed and nuclear in some sense. And we thought that we could build this app to connect families, right? It was called Tribe, TRIBE. And we wanted to connect families.
Great name.
Yeah, thank you. And all of that sounds good so far, right? I mean, it sounds noble even, right? But we grossly underestimated the time, effort, resources, money, patience, skills, and you could probably add another 20 things in there required to build a consumer app, right? App Store discovery is hard. One thing that I realized, you either go viral or you have to spend a ton of money on acquisition, right? So more dollars, more users, and so on. And once you've acquired these consumers, there's the other business of having to retain them and then having to make money out of them, right? Which is, again, not a trivial thing as well. 80% of the people who download an app don't use an app after 3 days, and a further 40% of them actually delete the app, right? So
Bye-bye.
these are exactly, right? So you can see how the odds are really stacked against you.
I'm just
And
thinking that as you're telling this story, the listeners and myself are all thinking about apps that we've downloaded,
yeah,
and like how many we didn't do anything with, but then there's the other ones. Why is it that one grabbed me? So yeah, this is great.
yeah. So when you look at it, right? I mean, we have this sort of survivorship bias in some sense. I mean, when you look at the apps that you use, you don't think about the apps that you don't use, or you probably download and then delete it, or you didn't even bother downloading, right? So again, huge respect for anyone who's made it in the app business. I mean, it kind of looks easy from the outside, but man, it is super difficult, right? Super difficult to do it. And that's really what we realized, that execution is super hard. And we learned that through many different heartbreaks that we got along the way. And long story short, we had to wind up after about a couple of years is trying. And this involved, unfortunately, this involved letting go of people that I had hired and nurtured. I hadn't taken a salary for something like about 8 or 9 months. I was pretty broke by then, and uh, you know. I didn't have that self confidence to do anything really. So I hit a real low point around then. But yeah, I've since, of course, recovered splendidly, thank God, and
Can
I've been
can
able to
you
reflect
can
upon
you
this. Yeah.
can you remember one day that was like the lowest time, whether that was
Oh,
dealing
sure.
with your employees or whether that was you coming to the realization, holy crap, I just wasted all this time and I lost,
Yeah.
time and money and
Yeah.
here I am.
Yeah. So the realization kind of dawns on you, right? But then, I mean, you don't act upon it. There are the hints, right? And, uh, other startup founders who are listening can talk about this as well. A startup is something like a baby. You kind of give birth to it, you nurture it, and then, to say that you're going to let it go is perhaps one of the most difficult choices one has to do, right? And that things aren't going right, but then to actually take that decision is I think it was many months in the making, and it took a lot out of me, and I can remember many different days when I was probably short of cash, and I was literally hungry, or I had probably a friend's marriage coming up, and I didn't really have anything to offer as a gift, or plenty of these embarrassing social situations. But really, what really stung was not being able to live up to that potential. We were
Mm.
running a successful business, but then just pivoting to do something else, and then realizing that this isn't going anywhere. That kind of hits you in faces, and yeah, many different moments along the way.
Mm. So tell me, what were the lessons that you learned from it?
Well, the one overriding lesson that I learned from this was to not go all in. We're often peddled this nonsense that you should follow your passions, and oftentimes, I mean, there's this Mark Twain quote. I still think it's Mark Twain, although I mean he's often misquoted, right? Throw off the bowline, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds, and all of that romantic stuff. And I think there's value in that, right? I don't think, I mean, you should confine yourself to doing something mediocre. But then obviously there is a halfway mark, right? You don't
Mm.
really have to throw off the bowlines in the literal sense of it, right? So one thing, and we spoke about this earlier, was the element of risk and probability. I wish I understood that a little better. I wish I had discovered Nassim Taleb a little better, and I wish I had read Fooled by Randomness a little better,
Mm.
because oftentimes we kind of model risk and probability in real life, as he says, as six people playing Russian roulette. The difference between six people playing Russian roulette and you playing Russian roulette six times, right? Now, there couldn't. I mean, you think about it and it's so obvious, but then you make these choices every day, and you catch yourself doing it, right? Because you playing Russian roulette six times is destined to fail, right? I mean, there may not be a third, fourth, or fifth time, and yeah, always have a plan B, I would say.
Mm.
It's not fashionable, and you won't hear of this from all of the quote unquote successful people. But that there's a lot of survivorship bias as well,
Yep.
especially if you're starting a business. So it's going to take a lot of out of you, and it's good to have like a solid plan B.
Great. Well, maybe I'll share a few things. First of all, I want to highlight an episode 265 with Velo Roy, also from India, who explained how when his startup that he was involved in failed, he had to get on a plane and go back to his home uh, state, I guess, in India and or province, and just tears, on that plane as he was
Yeah.
flying home, and the pain of loss, the pain of failure, is just so real. There's a few things that I would talk about. The first one is you reminded me. I like to say that when you think about if you remember when we're in school, we use a compass, If you put a point down and then you
Yeah.
can draw a circle with that.
Yeah.
A compass is a good example of the idea of pivoting, because when you draw a circle properly, you keep the sharp end down on the
Yeah.
piece of paper, and then you pivot
Yeah.
the pencil
Yeah.
around in a circle. And the key thing about that is that that sharp end is set to the ground. And the same thing about pivoting. A lot of times we look at pivoting and we make big changes, but the fact is a pivot is just a small change. And like a pivot from a service to a product or a product to a service, these are huge changes.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that I really made me remind myself that if you hear the word pivot, stop. Wait a minute. Are we talking about changing the business? Or are we talking about a little pivot? If we're talking about changing the business, it's not a pivot. It's a new business.
Yeah.
And
No, it's absolutely, yeah. That's a very pertinent point. I think you need something to revolve around, right? You need that central fulcrum to revolve around. I think what we were doing was not a pivot. I mean, we were hopping around. We were really doing a jump. I would say, right? Yeah.
now it also reminded me of my worst investment ever, which was with a friend of mine, and we decided to make an app. And he was the driving force, and really smart guy, and he had a really great idea. But after spending a lot of money in developing this, there came a point where I had this realization that just like you, we were going to bring an app or a software or a website out into the big world to compete globally, because that's ultimately what you're doing nowadays. And I just realized, we need $5 million to do this.
Yeah.
We're going to
Yeah.
go up against the best out there. We need 5 million bucks now to have the marketing budget, to have the programmers, to have everything. You just can't do it out of your garage anymore unless you've just got something absolutely amazing. And it was at that point that I just realized, nope, we're not ready for that. And I'm not comfortable going out and raising capital from friends and family or others to do that. And that's when that idea sadly had to die. And so there's this where you go from the idea of the excitement of an idea and all that to the reality of global competition. And then it really is a matter of, and if we had gone in, we would have been like a 16-year-old, skinny kid going into the ring with Mike Tyson. Boom, one punch, and we would have been out. Luckily, we didn't do that. Now, I want to highlight another thing, which is survivorship bias, which you mentioned a few times. And that's really, as I talk in the world of investing. In fact, I was just advising one of my clients on the business that they have. And I've done a lot of the back office academic work on the investment methodology of this. And basically, they're talking about, all these other people talking about their great investment returns. And I'm like, it's all survivorship bias. It's all winners. They're talking about their winners, but they're not talking about their losers. And that's the beauty of this podcast, is that there's no survivorship bias here. we are talking about our losses. So that come to us if you want to talk about getting rid of survivorship bias. This is a place where we can really honestly do that. And survivorship bias can be so dangerous because it can pull you into things. Now, there's one last thing that I want to talk about, and that is about revenue. We oftentimes say that revenue is proof of concept. And as a finance guy, I like to say, and profit is proof of competence. But the idea that I've learned from one of my businesses here, which is Coffee Works, we're a coffee roasting company, is that my new goal when I meet anybody who says they're startup, I mean, unless it's like something amazing, but even Amazon, you can say, got a lot of resistance in the beginning. Just about any startup, my whole thing is, when can you get to $3 to $5 million in revenue? You must have $3 to $5 million of revenue to support the infrastructure you need to run a business without killing yourself. You've got to have a human resource team. You've got to have a head of sales. You've got to have you can't do it all. And so many people listening to this podcast and otherwise are messing around with $300,000 in revenue and this and that. You have got to move to 3 million as fast as possible. Otherwise, you're going to burn yourself out. And so I never thought about the fact that you really need to hit that number to get the the resources to have the infrastructure to really run the business without burning yourself out. Those are all the things I took away from yours. Anything you would add?
No, those are all great points. Really great points. And see, in the end, I think you have to be deliberate about your choices. And I think founders often fall into this trap of trying to find a problem to solve. You really have to abstract yourself away from that problem, and look at the market in itself, right? Are there enough people who would really pay you to solve this problem? And is that something that you are uniquely qualified to solve? And how much time, effort, and resources it's going to take? And that's something that I've noticed, over the last year that I've been doing the Startup Operator podcast. The amount of savviness that founders have at this point of time is amazing. I would say about 10 years back, we were just like, kids trying to, solve a problem. Really went into it cold without understanding any of these things. But people today are a lot more deliberate about it. And yeah, that's something to be optimistic about, I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, someone like yourself is such a valuable resource because you've been through it, and the idea of minimum viable product and that type of stuff is out there. It's great knowledge, but when you've actually been, struggling in that space, you really know the value of it. So
Yeah.
let me ask you, based on what you learned from this story and what you continue to learn, what one action would you recommend our listeners take to avoid suffering the same fate?
Well, really, I think just be deliberate about your choices. That's a great jar, by the way.
1.5 milliliters.
Wow. Okay.
Try to drink a lot of water with a little lemon in there.
Right. So yeah, make deliberate choices. You can certainly be optimistic about the future. I'm not saying that you should sort of think that the sun will cause skin cancer and things to that effect. You don't have to be overly pessimistic. You should be optimistic about the future. You can think that we will solve climate change at some point, so on and so forth. You can see how the vaccine has happened, right? For instance, less than a year and we have a vaccine out in the market. But it's also extremely important to be pragmatic about the present. When I say the present, I mean you could also sort of extrapolate it to the midterm as well. Be extremely, extremely pragmatic about it. In some sense, I would say, uh, be a little pessimistic also, if possible, about your execution. You can be super optimistic about your vision, but be a little pragmatic or even slightly pessimistic about your execution. Understand, what things will fail, and what you will do in that eventuality. Because when you do, or if you do meet that fate or circumstance, I mean, you're just better prepared for it. Even if you have just thought about it, right? So play up all of your what if scenarios a little better, I would say, because founders tend to get carried away with all of the joy that comes with ideating and building and stuff like that. But it's useful to stay grounded, and it serves the business. It serves the business way better. An old boss of mine used to say Murphy was an optimist, you know. And that's a good one to think about when you're executing, and also there's a quote by Louis Gersner, right? Only the paranoid survive. Yeah, so not fashionable again.
Yep.
We tend to think of these as relics of an age gone by, but it's important to kind of keep this at some point in your memory. I mean, it's important, I would say.
Be pragmatic about the present and what matters. In a good phrase that we used in America was when the rubber hits the road. Like the wheels spinning and all that is so exciting, but whoa, it can get out of control real fast. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's great. Fantastic. All right. Well, last question.
sure.
What's your number one goal for the next 12 months?
Uh, well, I'd like to stay healthy and happy. First of all, I'd like to keep my family happy as well, and as everyone should. Well, it's remarkable times, as I mentioned. We have a vaccine out in the market, and we'll be out of this soon. I'm really looking forward to meeting people. Not really, being pensive or skeptical about that. But otherwise, from a professional standpoint, interesting things happening at Vymo. and we're scaling very rapidly across the world. And this year, the US and Japan markets look super interesting for us. And I'd love to scale. I'd love to help my team scale, and of course, the couple of podcasts as well. Both of these, started very organically. We didn't have any grand design as such, but we've done about, I would say, 200 plus podcasts on the both of them combined, and really hope to build a better audience, bigger audience, and have better engagement on that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, for the listeners out there who want to understand what's going on in India and in the startup scene, what a great, opportunity through the startup podcast. All right, the startup operator. And now, and it's good that you mentioned operator in the podcast because that's really where the rubber hits the road, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, listeners, there you have it, another story of laws to keep you winning. And my number one goal for the next 12 months is to help you, my listener, to reduce your risk in your life. So go to myworstinvestmentever.com right now and download the risk reduction checklist and see how you measure up. As we conclude, Roshan, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And on behalf of A Stotts Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever
Yes.
into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
Thank you so much, Andrew. This was certainly an interesting experience. And again, you've been doing a fantastic job. I think it's not easy to talk about failures, but you make it seem so simple. I think just a parting note, I think we underestimate how much success can be had by not doing dumb stuff. Things like don't do hard drugs, commit crime, go to prison, or, like in my case, put everything on the line without a plan, right? Think things through, so that's about it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stott, saying I'll see you on the upside.